Last Tuesday at 2:47 a.m., I took a photograph that shouldn't exist. It shows a London Underground station platform with Victorian tiles, brass fittings, and a destination board displaying stops that were never built. I've worked the night shift down here for 12 years. I know every tunnel, every abandoned platform, every service corridor in Zone 1. But 3 weeks ago, while checking a routine maintenance alert near King's Cross, I found something that's not on any Transport for London map, something that, according to every official record I've searched, was never supposed to exist. My name is Marcus Webb, and I'm what TfL calls a night infrastructure technician. Fancy title for someone who crawls through tunnels at 3 a.m. fixing signal failures and checking for track damage. It's not glamorous work, but after 12 years, these tunnels feel more like home than my flat in Bermondsey. The night everything changed started like any other. October 15th, 2024. I'd clocked in at 11 p.m. for the standard overnight shift. The first few hours were routine, checking the Northern Line between Camden and King's Cross, documenting some minor cable wear near Mornington Crescent. Nothing unusual. Around 2:30 a.m., my radio crackled with a maintenance alert. Signal anomaly between King's Cross and Russell Square southbound tunnel. These alerts happen maybe once a week, usually just a sensor picking up debris or moisture where it shouldn't be. I grabbed my kit and headed down to investigate. The southbound Northern Line tunnel between those stations is one I know well. Built in 1907, part of the original Charing Cross, Euston and Hampstead Railway. The tunnel runs straight for about 800 meters, with 2 small service alcoves and 1 emergency crossover point. I could walk it blindfolded. But that night, about 400 meters from King's Cross, I noticed something that made me stop dead in my tracks. There was a draft coming from the left wall, not unusual by itself. These old tunnels are full of ventilation shafts and forgotten passages, but I'd never felt air movement from that particular section before. I ran my flashlight along the tunnel wall and found what looked like a service entrance I'd somehow missed for 12 years. The opening was partially concealed behind what appeared to be a false wall panel, painted to match the surrounding brickwork. But the panel had shifted slightly, creating a gap just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Every alarm in my head was going off. In 12 years of night shifts, I'd never seen this opening. I'd walked past this exact spot hundreds of times. The official tunnel schematics showed solid wall here. No service passages, no maintenance access, nothing. I should have radioed it in immediately. That's protocol. But curiosity got the better of me. I wedged myself through the gap and found myself in a narrow corridor that sloped gently downward. The walls were the same Victorian brick as the main tunnel, but cleaner somehow. Less weathered. Something that took my breath away. A complete underground station platform, not abandoned or partially built. Complete. The platform was maybe 120 meters long with pristine white tiles, featuring the classic dark blue trim from the 1940s era. The ceiling was vaulted brick, painted cream and lit by brass light fixtures that were actually working. But here's what really made my skin crawl. Everything was clean, not just maintained, but clean like it was still in use. The platform. Benches were polished wood without a scratch. The destination boards were the old mechanical flip style from the 1950s, and they were displaying station names I'd never heard of. Aldersgate Deep, Foundling Fields, Tyburn Gate. I pulled out my phone to take pictures but got no signal. Not unusual underground, but my phone's GPS was acting strange too, showing my location as somewhere that didn't correspond to any map I knew. I took photos anyway, figuring I could review them later. The platform had 2 sets of tracks like a normal deep-level tube station. I could hear what sounded like distant train movements, that familiar rumble of carriages on rails. But according to my watch, it was 2:47 a.m. Well after the last trains had stopped running. I walked the length of the platform, my footsteps echoing strangely in the space. Everything looked functional. The track signals were active, showing green aspects. The electronic dot matrix displays were working, cycling through what appeared to be service announcements in that familiar Transport for London font. But the announcements were wrong. They referenced lines that don't exist. The next Aldersgate Deep service will be in 3 minutes, and good service on all Foundling lines. Some mentioned delays due to wartime restrictions and blackout protocols. At the far end of the platform, I found a small office with frosted glass windows. The door was unlocked. Inside was a fully equipped station master's office that looked like it had been frozen in time around 1943. There were duty rosters on clipboards, all dated from late 1943 to early 1944. The names on the rosters weren't in any TFL employee database I'd ever seen. I spent maybe 20 minutes in that station, taking photos and trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then I heard something that made me run. The unmistakable sound of an approaching train, complete with the characteristic whistle of pneumatic brakes engaging. But there shouldn't have been any trains running on any line at that hour. I didn't wait to see what kind of train it was. We're clear. This wasn't some stress-induced hallucination or trick of shadows. I had documented evidence of a complete underground station that, according to every map and schematic I could access, simply didn't exist. My first step was checking the official TFL infrastructure database. I have access through my work credentials to detailed tunnel maps, including abandoned sections and unfinished projects. The area where I'd found the hidden entrance showed nothing but solid earth and utility conduits. No station, no platform, no tunnels. But I've learned that London's underground is full of secrets. During my 12 years on the job, I discovered plenty of forgotten passages, bricked-up platforms, and abandoned sections that weren't on the current maps. The difference was that those places looked abandoned, covered in decades of dust, with obvious signs of disuse and decay. This station looked operational. I started digging deeper into London Transport's historical archives. The station names I'd seen on those destination boards, Aldersgate Deep, Foundling Fields, Tyburn Gate, they weren't completely unfamiliar. I found references to them in wartime planning documents from 1942 and 1943. Here's where things got really interesting. During World War II, the British government had plans for a massive expansion of the underground system, partly for civilian shelter, but also for military purposes. Some of these projects were documented, like the deep-level shelters that were actually built, but others existed only in classified planning stages. I found a partially declassified document from 1943 titled London Transport Wartime Infrastructure Development, Phase 3. It mentioned 3 new deep-level stations designed to serve as both transport hubs and secure government facilities. The proposed stations were listed as Aldersgate Deep, Foundling Fields, and Tyburn Gate, the exact names I'd seen on those destination boards. According to the document, construction had begun on all 3 stations in late 1943. But then the project was abruptly canceled in early 1944, with all work halted and access points sealed. The official reason given was resource reallocation to priority operations, but handwritten notes in the margin suggested there were other concerns, references to structural anomalies, workforce incidents, and consultation with Special Operations Executive. The Special Operations Executive, Churchill's secret organization for espionage and sabotage operations. Why would they be involved in underground construction? I tried to access more detailed records, but most of the relevant files were either still classified or had been lost during archive reorganizations in the 1970s. However, I did find something in the National Archives that made my blood run cold. A memorandum dated March 15, 1944, from the London Transport Executive to the War Office. It was heavily redacted, but the visible portions mentioned immediate cessation of deep-level construction activities and permanent sealing of all access points following incident of March 12th. The memo was signed by someone whose name had been blacked out, but the letterhead showed it was from the same office that had overseen the construction of the 3 mystery stations. March 12, 1944. I cross-referenced that date with wartime records and found something chilling. On the night of March 11, 1944, there had been an air raid on London. Not unusual for that period, but this particular raid had some odd characteristics. Several reports from civil defense workers mentioned unusual underground disturbances and sounds of trains running during the all-clear period. More disturbing were the missing persons reports from that week. 7 London transport workers and 3 government officials were reported missing between March 12 and March 16, 1944. All were connected to the Deep Level Station project. The official explanation was that they had been killed during the air raid, but their bodies were never found. I found one more document that made everything click into place. A brief report from a Royal Engineer unit, dated March 13, 1944. The report mentioned emergency sealing operations at 3 unauthorized construction sites and deployment of specialized concrete mixtures to ensure permanent closure. The locations weren't specified, but the timing matched perfectly. So here's what I pieced together. The government had started construction on 3 secret underground stations during the war. Something went wrong on March 12, 1944. Something bad enough to involve Churchill's spy organization and require immediate permanent sealing of the sites. The official story was that the projects were simply canceled due to resource constraints. But the real reason was covered up, except they hadn't sealed everything properly. Somehow, the station I'd found was still accessible, still operational, but operational how and by whom? I tried to find more recent information about unexplained incidents near King's Cross, but most of what I found was easily dismissed urban legend stuff. Stories about ghost trains and phantom passengers that you'd expect in a system as old as the London Underground. But there was one incident that caught my attention. In 2019, a TfL engineer named Sarah Collins had reported finding an uncharted passage during routine maintenance near Russell Square. She'd filed a formal report, describing a tunnel that led to what appeared to be a disused station platform. Her report was marked, investigated and resolved, with no further details. I tried to contact Sarah Collins, but according to TfL records, she'd transferred to another department shortly after filing that report. When I called the number on file, it had been disconnected. That's when I realized I might not be the first person to find this place, and judging by what happened to Sarah Collins, maybe talking about it wasn't the smartest idea, but I had to go back. I had to understand what I'd found. 3 days after my initial discovery, I made the decision to return to the hidden station. I'd spent those 3 days in a fog of sleepless research and growing paranoia. Every time my supervisor assigned me to work near King's Cross, my heart would race. Every time I passed that section of tunnel during routine patrols, I'd catch myself looking for that false wall panel. I told myself I was going back to gather more evidence, to document everything properly so I could report it through official channels. But honestly, I think I was going back because I had to know. The mystery was eating at me from the inside. I chose a Friday night for my return visit. Friday nights on the night shift tend to be quieter. Fewer emergency calls, less radio chatter. I'd have more time to investigate without being missed. Reached the concealed entrance around 1:30 a.m. The false wall panel was still shifted, creating that same narrow gap. I squeezed through and made my way down the sloping corridor. This time with better equipment, a proper LED headlamp, spare batteries, and a digital camera in addition to my phone. The station platform looked exactly as I'd left it. Clean, well lit, impossibly pristine. But this time I noticed details I'd missed during my first panicked visit. The station name signs were there. Aldersgate Deep, in the classic Johnston typeface used throughout the underground system. The signs looked authentic, manufactured rather than homemade. I started photographing everything systematically. The platform layout, the vintage fixtures, the mysterious destination boards. I paid special attention to the station master's office, documenting those 1940s duty rosters and the dated paperwork scattered across the desk. That's when I noticed something that hadn't been there before. On the desk, next to the clipboards, I'd seen 3 days earlier was a fresh cup of tea. Still warm. Steam was rising from the surface. Someone else was here. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice echoed strangely in the space, seeming to carry much further than it should have. No response. I continued my documentation, but now every shadow seemed threatening, every echo potentially hiding another presence. The station felt different this time, less like an abandoned curiosity and more like a place where I wasn't welcome. I was photographing the electronic displays when they changed. Instead of the usual service announcements, new text began. Scrolling across the screens, next train, Aldersgate, deep to Foundling Fields. Estimated arrival, 2 minutes. My watch showed 1:47 a.m. There were no scheduled trains on any line at that hour. The display continued cycling. Please stand clear of the platform edge. Train approaching. I could hear it now. That familiar rumble of an approaching underground train. The sound was coming from the southbound tunnel, growing steadily louder. I could see lights in the distance, the characteristic twin beams of a tube train's headlights. Every instinct told me to run, but I was frozen by the impossibility of what I was seeing. A train was actually coming, at 1:47 a.m., on tracks that weren't supposed to exist, serving a station that had been sealed for 80 years. The train pulled into the station with a familiar hiss of pneumatic brakes. It was a 1938 stock train, the type that ran on the underground during World War II. These trains had been completely phased out by the 1980s, but this one looked brand new. Clean red paintwork, polished windows, bright interior lighting. Doors opened with that characteristic London Underground chime, but instead of the modern electronic sound, it was the original mechanical bell used on the wartime trains. I could see inside the carriages. They were occupied. The passengers looked wrong. Not obviously supernatural or ghostly, just wrong, in ways I couldn't quite define. They were dressed in clothing from the 1940s, all perfectly clean and pressed. Men in suits and overcoats, women in wool dresses and headscarves, all sitting perfectly still, staring straight ahead with expressions of polite patience. One woman near the window turned to look directly at me. She was maybe 30 years old, with carefully curled hair and bright red lipstick. She smiled and raised her hand in a small wave, as if she recognized me. That's when I noticed her Transport for London employee badge, the same type I wear, but in the style used during the 1940s. Her name tag read S. Collins, Sarah Collins, the engineer who had reported finding this place in 2019. She mouthed something at me through the window. I couldn't hear her clearly over the train's engine noise, but it looked like she was saying, "Get on." The other passengers had turned too. Look at me now. All wearing the same polite, expectant expressions, all wearing variations of 1940s TfL employee uniforms, all waiting for me to board the train. The electronic displays were flashing now. Final call. Aldersgate deep to Foundling Fields. Doors closing. But Sarah Collins was shaking her head, her expression urgent. She pressed her hands against the window and mouthed something else. This time I could read her lips clearly. Don't get on. The train doors slid shut with that mechanical chime. As the train pulled away, I caught a glimpse of more passengers in the rear carriages. Dozens of them, all in period clothing, all with the same eerily patient expressions. The last car passed, and the platform was quiet again. The electronic displays returned to their normal announcements about service delays and wartime restrictions. I ran. I squeezed back through that false wall panel and sprinted down the main tunnel toward King's Cross, not stopping until I was back in the bright fluorescent lighting of the modern underground system. When I checked my photos later, most were corrupted. The few that survived showed only empty platform shots. No warm teacup, no electronic displays, no evidence of the train I'd witnessed. But one photo was clear. A shot of the station master's office window, taken just before but in the reflection, barely visible, was the image of Sarah Collins standing on the platform behind me. She'd never left this place. After seeing Sarah Collins on that train, I knew I couldn't handle this alone, but I also couldn't report it through official channels. Not when one of our own engineers had apparently disappeared after finding this place. I needed help from someone outside the system, someone who wouldn't automatically dismiss what I was telling them. I reached out to Dr. Emma Richardson, a historian at University College London, who specializes in wartime London infrastructure. I'd attended one of her public lectures about underground deep shelters a few months earlier. She seemed like someone who might take my story seriously, or at least listen long enough for me to present my evidence. We met at a cafe near Russell Square, about as far from any TfL property as I could manage. I brought printed copies of the few photographs that hadn't corrupted, along with copies of the historical documents I'd found in the archives. Dr. Richardson listened to my entire story without interruption. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, studying the photographs. "Marcus," she said finally, "I've been researching London's wartime infrastructure for 15 years. I've heard stories like yours before, but I've never seen evidence this compelling." She told me about her own research into the canceled deep-level projects. She'd been trying to piece together what happened to those 3 stations for years, but had hit the same walls of classified documents and missing records that I'd encountered. "What you found," she said, "might be the key to understanding one of the biggest cover-ups in London transport history." She agreed to help me investigate, but under strict conditions. We would document everything carefully, maintain detailed records, and never go to the site alone. She also insisted we research more about the people who had worked on the original project, particularly those who had gone missing in March 1944. Over the next week, Dr. Richardson used her academic credentials to access archives I couldn't reach. What she found painted a disturbing picture of the deep-level project's final days. The project hadn't just been canceled, it had been shut down in panic. The construction workers had reported increasingly strange incidents during the final weeks of work. Tools going missing, strange sounds from sealed sections of tunnel, and several workers claiming to see people in the tunnels who weren't on any work roster. The breaking point came on March 11, 1944. According to a witness statement that Dr. Richardson found in recently declassified SOE files, the night shift supervisor at Aldersgate Deep had radioed for emergency assistance, reporting that his entire work crew had gone missing in the deep sections. When the rescue team arrived, they found the construction site empty. No workers, no equipment, no signs of struggle, but the tunnels were full of sounds, voices calling from areas that hadn't been excavated yet, footsteps in sealed passages, the sound of trains running on tracks that hadn't been laid. The SOE classified the incident as a Category 5 anomaly, their highest-level designation for unexplained events that posed potential threats to national security. Within 48 hours, all 3 station sites had been sealed with specialized concrete designed to be permanent and tamper-proof. But Dr. Richardson found something else that made everything worse. The missing workers from 1944 hadn't just disappeared, they'd been seen again. Over the decades, there had been sporadic reports of London transport employees encountering people in wartime uniforms in various parts of the underground system. Most of these reports were dismissed as pranks or stress-related hallucinations, but Dr. Richardson had found a pattern. The sightings were always near locations that connected to the original deep-level construction sites, and the people being sighted matched the descriptions of the workers who had gone missing 80 years ago. "Marcus," she said, "I think your hidden station isn't just a forgotten piece of infrastructure. I think it's some kind of collection point, a place where people get pulled in and can't leave." She showed me a list of TfL employees who had filed reports about finding uncharted passages or unauthorized construction over the past 20 years. 12 names in total, including Sarah Collins. Of those 12, 7 had either quit their jobs shortly after filing their reports or had been transferred to other departments where they couldn't be easily contacted. But 5 had simply stopped showing up for work. No resignations, no forwarding addresses, no explanations. Just gone. We tried to contact the 7 who had been transferred or quit. 3 phone numbers were disconnected. 2 people denied ever filing such reports, seeming genuinely confused when we mentioned them. 1 hung up immediately when we mentioned underground anomalies. The 7th person agreed to meet with us. James Morton, a former signal technician who had reported finding an impossibly clean Victorian station platform near Euston in 2017. He'd quit his job 2 weeks later and had been working as a private security guard ever since. James met us at the same cafe where I'd first spoken with Dr. Richardson. He looked tired, older than his 42 years, with the kind of haunted expression I was beginning to recognize in my own mirror. "I know why you're here," he said, before we could even introduce ourselves. "You found one of them, didn't you? One of the ghost stations." He told us his story. It was remarkably similar to mine. The accidental discovery, the impossibly preserved station, the sense of being watched. But James had gone further than I had. He'd actually boarded one of the trains. It was like being in a museum exhibit. He said, "Everything from the 1940s, perfectly preserved." The other passengers were polite, quiet. They seemed happy to have me there. The train ran for what felt like hours, stopping at stations I'd never heard of, all deep underground. James had finally gotten off at a station called Foundling Fields. The platform there had been full of people in wartime clothing, all TfL employees from different eras. He'd recognized several faces from company photos and memorial walls, people who had supposedly died in accidents or simply disappeared over the decades. They welcomed me, he said, offered me a job, a place to stay, said I could be part of the network forever, help keep the trains running for all the other lost workers who would find their way down there eventually. James had refused and demanded to return to the surface. The other passengers hadn't tried to stop him, but they'd seemed disappointed. The train had brought him back to where he'd started, and he'd never gone back. "But Marcus," he said, looking directly at me, "they're still there. And they're still collecting people. Every time someone finds their way into those tunnels, they have the choice. Join the network, or leave, and never speak of it again." "What happens if you talk about it?" Dr. Richardson asked. James smiled, grimly. "You tell me. You're the ones investigating it now." After meeting with James Morton, Dr. Richardson and I spent 2 more weeks researching every angle we could think of. We mapped the locations of all reported sightings, cross-referenced missing persons reports with underground construction projects, and even consulted with paranormal investigators who had documented similar phenomena in other cities. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. The deep-level stations weren't just abandoned infrastructure. They were somehow still functioning, operating according to their own rules and timeline, collecting people who stumbled across them and adding them to a ghostly workforce that had been growing for 80 years. The question was what to do about. We could try to report it to authorities, but who would believe us? The few officials who might take us seriously were probably already aware of the situation and actively covering it up. We could go public, but without concrete proof, we'd just be dismissed as cranks spreading urban legends. Or we could go back. Document everything properly. Get proof that couldn't be dismissed or covered up. It was a terrible idea. James Morton's story made it clear that the entities running those stations were actively recruiting people. Sarah Collins was proof that not everyone who went down there came back up, but it felt like the only way to get answers, and more importantly, the only way to potentially help the people who were trapped down there. Dr. Richardson insisted on coming with me. I tried to talk her out of it, but she was adamant. "This is the discovery of a lifetime," she said. "Whatever's down there, it's a piece of London's history that's been hidden for 8 decades. I'm not missing the chance to document it properly." We planned the expedition carefully. Multiple cameras, backup lighting, portable recording equipment, and most importantly, a detailed plan for staying together and getting out quickly if things went wrong. We also left sealed envelopes with a colleague of Dr. Richardson's to be opened if we didn't return within 24 hours. We entered the tunnel system at 1:15 a.m. on a Tuesday night. I'd chosen a night when I was officially scheduled for routine maintenance in the area, so my presence wouldn't raise any immediate flags if we were discovered. The false wall panel was still shifted, still providing access to the hidden corridor. But something felt different as we squeezed through. The air was warmer, more humid. There were sounds echoing from deeper in the tunnel. Not mechanical sounds, but voices. Conversations. Laughter. The everyday sounds of people going about their business. Dr. Richardson was documenting everything with her camera, whispering observations into her digital recorder. As we approached the main platform, she grabbed my arm. "Marcus, look at this." The walls of the corridor were covered with plaques. Brass memorial plates like the ones you see throughout the London Underground commemorating various milestones and achievements. But these plaques were different. They commemorated people, not events. "In memory of Thomas Hartwell, signal technician, 1952-1978. Still keeping the trains running. Sarah Collins, infrastructure engineer, 2019-present. Welcome to the permanent night shift. James Morrison, track inspector, 1967, 1992. Found his true calling underground. There were dozens of them, dating from the 1940s to the present day. A memorial wall for people who had never officially died, who had simply joined the underground workforce and been forgotten by the surface world. We reached the main platform, and it was more active than I'd ever seen it. The waiting area had maybe 20 people scattered across the benches and standing areas. All in period clothing from different eras, all wearing various versions of London transport uniforms from across the decades. They looked up as we entered. Not with surprise or alarm, but with the kind of polite acknowledgement you'd give to fellow passengers joining you on a late-night platform. Several smiled and nodded. One elderly man in a 1960s-era conductor's uniform tipped his cap to Dr. Richardson. The electronic displays were showing more destinations than I'd seen before. Next train, Aldersgate Deep to Foundling Fields, 2 minutes. Following service, Tyburn Gate Express, 4 minutes. Special service, Surface Connection, 15 minutes. Dr. Richardson was frantically photographing everything, but I noticed her camera display showing only static. The same problem I'd encountered with corrupted photos. Whatever was happening here didn't want to be documented by outside technology. I recognized Sarah Collins standing near the far end of the platform. She saw me and walked over, her expression friendly but sad. "Hello, Marcus," she said. Her voice sounded perfectly normal, not ghostly or ethereal. "I was wondering when you'd come back. You can't stay away from a mystery like this, can you?" "Sarah, you were reported as transferred to another department. How long have you been down here?" "Time works differently down here," she said. "It's been 3 years since I first found this place, but it feels like much longer. And much shorter. We measure time by the trains now, not by clocks." Dr. Richardson stepped forward. "Ms. Collins, I'm Dr. Emma Richardson from UCL. I'm researching the wartime construction projects. Can you tell us what happened to the original workers who went missing in 1944? Sarah gestured toward the other passengers on the platform. "Some of them are here. The work never really stopped, you see. The stations were built, the tunnels were connected, the trains started running. But they were built wrong somehow. Built in a way that connected them more to the idea of London Underground than to actual London. A train was approaching. I could hear the familiar rumble and see the lights in the tunnel. Sarah continued talking as the sound grew louder. The government tried to seal us off from the surface world, but they couldn't seal us off from the underground itself. We became part of the network, part of the idea of what London Underground is supposed to be. Trains that run on time, workers who never leave their posts, passengers who wait patiently, no matter how long the delays." The train pulled into the station, another 1938 stock train, pristine and clean. The doors opened with that mechanical chime. "The beautiful thing is," Sarah said, "no one here is unhappy. The work is meaningful, the schedule is reliable, and we're all part of something larger than ourselves. We keep the real underground running smoothly by taking care of all the impossible parts down here." Some of the waiting passengers began boarding the train. They moved with the unhurried efficiency of people who knew exactly where they were going and weren't concerned about being late. "You can leave," Sarah said to us. "Some people do. But if you stay, you'll always be welcome here. There's always work for good people in the underground." Dr. Richardson was backing toward the corridor entrance, pulling on my sleeve. "Marcus, we need to go. Now." But I found myself looking at that train, at the calm faces of the passengers inside. After 12 years of night shifts, of broken equipment and delayed trains and endless maintenance issues, there was something appealing about Sarah's description of meaningful work and reliable schedules. "Marcus," Dr. Richardson's voice was urgent. "The entrance is sealing." I turned and saw that the corridor we'd entered through was filling with that same specialized concrete the government had used in 1944. The gap was narrowing rapidly. We ran. We made it out with minutes to spare. The entrance sealed completely behind us, leaving no trace it had ever existed. Dr. Richardson's recordings were corrupted, her photos blank. But we both remember what we saw, what Sarah told us. Sometimes I catch myself listening for impossible trains during my night shifts, wondering if I made the right choice. The work down there sounded peaceful, permanent. But I'm still here, still walking these tunnels, still keeping watch. Because someone needs to document these stories, even if no one believes them. Even if the evidence disappears every time.